It is the year 1974. The Vietnam War has ended. The Cold War is raging. Man has already walked on the moon. And deep inside a jungle on a tiny Philippine island, one man is still fighting World War II. His name is Hiroo Onoda, an officer of the Imperial Japanese Army. For 30 years, he's lived off the land, hunting by night, hiding by day. He believes Japan still fights the Allies. He believes surrender is betrayal. To him, the war isn't history. It's today. Villagers whisper of a ghost soldier who steals food and fires, warning shots at anyone who comes near. Search parties have come and gone. Leaflets have been dropped from planes. Radios have been left playing the news. But every time, Onoda reads the messages and shakes his head. This is enemy propaganda, he tells himself, because in his mind, the war could not be over until he was ordered personally to stop. This is not fiction. This is not legend. It is the story of a man so loyal, so consumed by duty, that time itself could not convince him to surrender. A man who turned a lonely island into a battlefield long after the world had moved on. A man who carried his rifle, his orders, and his faith through 3 decades of silence. This is the true story of Hiroo Onoda, the last soldier of World War II. Hiroo Onoda was born in 1,922 inches, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan, a quiet boy in a world growing louder with ambition and nationalism. His father had been a soldier, his older brothers too. The Onoda family believed in loyalty, honor, and the emperor above all. By the time Hiroo turned 18, Japan had already invaded China. War was the air he breathed. In 1942, he joined the Imperial Army. He wasn't a brute. He was analytical, observant traits that caught the eye of his superiors. Soon he was chosen for special training in the art of intelligence and guerrilla warfare. At the Nakano School, Japan's elite military intelligence academy, Onoda learned how to survive behind enemy lines. He was taught sabotage, disguise, psychological warfare, and one unbreakable principle. A true soldier never surrenders. He fights until victory or death. Those words would one day define his entire life. For Onoda, surrender was not an option. It was erasure. The emperor's command was absolute. As 1,944 approached, and Japan's empire began to crumble under Allied assault, the army needed men who could resist from the shadows, who could keep the flame of war alive, even when all seemed lost. Onoda was the perfect candidate. He was 22 years old when he received his final assignment, an operation that would last far longer than anyone imagined. In December 1944, Onoda was ordered to Lubang Island, a small, jungle-covered patch in the western Philippines. His mission: to sabotage airstrips, destroy docks, and prevent enemy landings. He was to disrupt operations, gather intelligence, and hold out at any cost. Before he departed, his commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, gave him specific orders. "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we will come for you." Those words branded themselves into Onoda's soul. To him, they were not mere instructions, they were a promise. Japan would return for him. When he arrived on Lubang, the situation was chaotic. Japanese forces were already losing ground. Officers refused to follow his sabotage plans. Discipline was crumbling. By February 1945, American troops invaded. Within weeks, most Japanese soldiers were killed or captured. But Onoda, now a lieutenant, escaped into the dense mountain jungle with 3 others: Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, and Private First Class Kinshichi Kozuka. The 4 men vowed to continue the fight. They would become ghosts in the forest, striking when the enemy least expected, keeping Japan's war alive even as the empire they served collapsed beyond the horizon. The jungle became their fortress, their prison, and their entire world. Thick vines, choking humidity, endless rain, it was nature's maze. They built bamboo shelters, stored stolen rice, and kept their rifles wrapped in oiled cloth. At night, they watched from the treetops as villagers lit fires below. To Onoda, these were collaborators with the enemy. Every sound became suspicious, every movement a threat. Weeks turned into months. The men saw American planes fly overhead, dropping leaflets declaring, "The war has ended. Japan has surrendered." But to Onoda, these were lies, psychological warfare. He'd been trained to resist exactly this kind of tactic. He burned the leaflets and reminded his men, "If Japan had lost, the emperor would have told us himself. Until then, we keep fighting." So they did. For them, 1945 never came. The war didn't end, it merely went silent. And in that silence, paranoia took root.
Time in the jungle eroded everything. Weapons, uniforms, even sanity. In 1949, after 4 years of endless fear and hunger, Private Akatsu could take no more. He slipped away from camp and surrendered to Philippine authorities. The Japanese government learned of his survival and sent more leaflets, urging the others to come home. But Onoda, seeing Akatsu's surrender as betrayal, refused to believe it. He told his remaining comrades, "The enemy has turned him. He'll be used against us." The jungle shrank their world of paranoia and duty. By now, the war had been over for half a decade, but for them, time stood still. The rusting of their rifles, the fading of their uniforms, the thinning of their hair, none of it mattered. They still believed in the emperor. They still waited for the order that would set them free. By 1950, the world had changed beyond recognition. The Allies were now rebuilding Japan. Cities once reduced to ashes were coming back to life under a new flag, one that no longer bore the rising sun of the empire. But deep within Lubang's jungle, Hiroo Onoda still carried that flag in his heart. He had memorized every fold of its fabric, every stroke of its red circle. To him, Japan's spirit was eternal, unbreakable, and his mission remained sacred. Sometimes he would climb the mountain ridges at night and look toward the horizon, imagining he could see Tokyo glowing in the distance. In his mind, millions of Japanese soldiers were still fighting somewhere out there, just like him. He didn't know that his war had ended 5 years ago. He didn't know Japan was now an ally of the very nations he believed were the enemy. And yet, he felt something change. When he raided villages, the locals no longer feared him as a soldier. They pitied him. They shouted, "The war is over! Go home!" But to Onoda, those words were an ambush disguised as kindness. The enemy, he thought, had grown smarter. Now they fought not with bullets, but with words. Years turned into a decade. Rainfall carved through their camps. Bamboo huts rotted away. The men grew lean, their clothes shredded by the jungle's cruelty. In 1952, a small plane flew overhead and dropped a bundle of newspapers, photographs, and letters from Japan debut. One photo showed Onoda's own family, older, smiling, holding a newspaper headline. "Japan at peace?" He stared at it under moonlight. It looked so real. But then he noticed something odd, a crease in the corner that seemed too neat, too deliberate. A trick, he thought. The enemy was testing their resolve again. He tore the photograph apart. The next morning, he gathered his men. "This war will not end until we receive direct orders from Major Taniguchi," he said. "Until then, we remain soldiers of the emperor." That night, they recited the imperial oath, their voices trembling with hunger, their hearts beating to a rhythm the world had long forgotten. In 1954, tragedy struck. Corporal Shuichi Shimada, Onoda's closest friend, was shot and killed by local searchers near a riverbank. They had gone down to steal some food when they were spotted. A bullet ripped through Shimada's leg, and though Onoda tried to carry him back, infection set in fast. For days, Shimada lay delirious in their makeshift hut. He whispered the emperor's name like a prayer until he finally stopped breathing. Onoda buried him beneath a palm tree and saluted. He whispered, "You did not die in vain. Japan will rise again." Now there were two, Onoda and Private Kozuka, two ghosts haunting a war that no longer existed. But for Onoda, the death of Shimada only hardened his faith. Each loss was proof of loyalty, proof that they were true soldiers, while the rest of the world had surrendered to comfort and cowardice.
The 1950s turned into the 1960s. The world had entered a new era: rock and roll, television, nuclear arms, the Cold War. But Onoda and Kozuka still lived in the 1940s. They built new shelters deeper in the jungle. Their uniforms were patched with bark and vines. They polished their old rifles daily, keeping them ready for a battle that would never come. At night, they'd listen to the hum of distant engines, perhaps fishing boats, perhaps planes. To them, each sound was a possible signal. They made maps, recorded movements, wrote coded notes. Onoda documented everything in a small notebook, still following military procedure, still acting like an intelligence officer of an empire that no longer existed. Villagers began calling them the Invisible Men. Fathers warned children not to wander too far, because the jungle still had soldiers who never died. By 1965, Onoda was 43 years old. He had lived more of his life in the jungle than he had in civilization. His body was lean, his skin darkened by decades of sun and rain, but his eyes, sharp, burning, were still those of a soldier. He and Kozuka continued to burn rice fields, destroy food stores, and attack those they thought were enemy collaborators. Each raid reminded them that their mission was still alive. Each gunshot echoed across time, as if connecting them to the ghosts of every fallen comrade. But reality was creeping closer. Newspapers from Manila wrote about Japanese holdouts still fighting in the Philippines. The world saw them as relics, tragic symbols of a war that refused to die. Onoda saw himself differently. He wasn't lost, he was loyal. By 1950, only 3 men remained: Onoda, Shimada, and Kozuka. They were thin, weathered, and forever alert, shadows of the disciplined soldiers they once were. Each night they sat under the swaying palms, cleaning their rifles with oil made from coconuts, listening to the sounds of frogs and distant waves. Sometimes they talked about home, about Japan's snowy mountains, their mothers, the taste of hot rice. But every conversation ended the same way, with silence and the quiet conviction that the war must go on. They raided the nearby villages for food, leaving notes behind that read, "We are Japanese soldiers. We will not harm you if you cooperate." But fear had spread among the islanders. Farmers set traps. Militias organized patrols. In one tragic raid in 1952, a villager was shot and killed. The Philippine Army launched another search. Planes circled the jungle again, dropping fresh leaflets printed with Onoda's name. One leaflet had a message from his brother: "Hiroo, our parents are gone. Japan has surrendered. Come home." But Onoda held the paper up to the light, shaking his head. "They forged the handwriting," he said quietly. "The Americans are clever." His men nodded, and the war. Their war continued. The longer they stayed hidden, the more brutal the jungle became. Rations ran out, boots fell apart, and their uniforms rotted into rags. Still, they marched, rifles always ready, eyes always scanning. In May 1954, tragedy struck. During a skirmish with a search party near a small hill, Corporal Shimada was hit by a stray bullet. The others dragged him back into the trees, tried to treat his wound with herbs and torn fabric. For days, Shimada shivered with fever, whispering for water and home. Onoda stayed by his side. He recited the emperor's name, prayed for strength. But Shimada died before dawn. It was the first time Onoda truly faced the price of his faith. He buried Shimada under palm leaves and saluted the mound in silence. That night, he wrote in his small notebook, "One more soldier has completed his duty. I must continue mine." He and Kozuka packed their weapons and moved deeper into the jungle. Now there were two. The 1950s turned into the 1960s. The world had changed beyond imagination. But for Onoda and Kozuka, time had frozen. They believed Japan was still resisting the Allies somewhere across the sea. They spoke of someday joining reinforcements, of retaking Lubang when orders arrived. They had built a strange rhythm of survival, hunting cattle, stealing rice, watching the coastline for any signs of Japanese ships. They repaired their weapons with scavenged parts and waxed their bullets against the humid air. Once a year, they performed a ritual. Bowing toward the east, saluting the invisible emperor, and reaffirming their mission. We will never surrender. But the jungle was shrinking. The locals were now armed with modern rifles. Helicopters buzzed above the treetops, dropping pamphlets and loudspeakers shouting in Japanese. The war ended in 1945. Return to Japan. Kozuka looked uneasy. He had begun to question everything. The endless raids, the lack of any message from command. He said one night, "Maybe it's really over, Lieutenant. Maybe we're the only ones left." Onoda stared into the fire. "If we are the last," he said, "then it's our duty to stay until the end." By 1965, 20 years after Japan's surrender, Onoda had become a ghost legend. Tourists spoke of the Japanese phantom haunting the island. Japanese newspapers sometimes mentioned him. A soldier still missing in Lubang. The Japanese embassy even sent missions to find him, broadcasting messages from his family. But every sound, every signal, was filtered through Onoda's hardened disbelief. To him, this was just another trick. American psychological warfare designed to make him surrender. He wrote in his notebook, "I will not be deceived by the enemy's words. The Japanese army will come." In Manila, people began to forget. The world had entered a new era. The Cold War, the space age, television, and pop culture. But in the dense greenery of Lubang, two men still hid with 1940 rifles, living as though the Pacific War had never ended. Each time Kozuka suggested leaving, Onoda's stare silenced him. Obedience had replaced logic. Faith had replaced truth. On October 19, 1972, the two soldiers saw farmers burning fields to prepare for harvest. Believing it was enemy sabotage, they attacked. Trying to destroy the piles of rice, gunfire erupted. In the chaos, Kozuka was struck by police bullets and fell to the ground. Onoda tried to drag his comrade away, but Kozuka was already dead. When he saw the body, Onoda froze. For 30 years they had shared everything: hunger, storms, hope, fear. Now once again he was alone. He buried Kozuka beside a stream and whispered, "Mission continues." He polished his rifle, shouldered his pack, and vanished into the jungle. Now he was the only soldier left in the Pacific, still fighting a war that had ended before he was even 30. For 2 years, Onoda survived entirely alone. He hunted wild pigs, drank rainwater, patched his clothes with bark. Sometimes he found old newspapers in the trash near villages. Stories about the Tokyo Olympics, the Vietnam War, man walking on the moon. He would study the photos, then shake his head. "Fabrications," he muttered. "American propaganda." He trusted nothing. He was a soldier trapped in a loop of his own loyalty. Locals occasionally saw him. A thin man in tattered uniform carrying a shining Arisaka rifle disappearing into mist. Children called him the mountain ghost. For him, every rustle was an ambush, every voice a deception. He wrote in his notebook, "No reinforcements have arrived. I must stay alive to report to my commander." And so, the war went on. Inside one man's mind and one forgotten corner of the world. In 1974, a young Japanese traveler named Norio Suzuki set out on an unusual mission. He wasn't a soldier or a scientist, just an adventurer chasing myths. He told his friends, "I'm going to find 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman." He arrived on Lubang Island with a camera, a smile, and almost no supplies. Locals warned him of the crazy Japanese soldier who might shoot him on sight. But Suzuki walked into the jungle anyway, calling out in Japanese, offering peace. Days later, he found him. A bearded man in torn uniform stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. Onoda aimed, but Suzuki shouted, "Onoda-san, the Emperor and Japan are waiting for you." There was silence. The stranger's voice was not military. It was soft, honest, and human. After 30 years of distrust, something inside Onoda hesitated. They sat under the shade of palm trees. Suzuki offered him food, newspapers, and photos from Japan. Onoda studied them carefully, flipping each page, testing the ink with his fingers. He saw images of skyscrapers, color televisions, a world unrecognizable from the one he left. Suzuki spoke gently. "It's over, Lieutenant. The war ended long ago. Please come home." Onoda's eyes were filled with both confusion and conviction. "I cannot leave," he said. "I am still under orders. I will not surrender until my commander releases me." Suzuki nodded. He promised to return, with Onoda's former commander. And for the first time in 30 years, Onoda watched another man walk away, and believed he might come back. Weeks later, a small plane landed on Lubang. Stepping off was an old man in civilian clothes, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, Onoda's former commanding officer. He carried with him a formal document, the imperial insignia still visible. In the heart of the jungle, the 2 men met again. Taniguchi read aloud the words that would end a private war. "The Imperial Army's Special Mission Unit in Lubang is hereby relieved of all duties. The war is over. You are ordered to cease all operations immediately." Onoda's body trembled. His face, hardened by decades of resistance, finally softened. He saluted and whispered, "Sir, I have served faithfully." He handed over his rifle, sword, and ammunition, all in perfect working condition. And with that gesture, the Pacific War, at least for Onoda.
One humid afternoon in 1953, a plane flew low over Lubang Island. It released hundreds of leaflets fluttering down like falling snow. They read, "The war ended on August 15, 1945. Japan has surrendered. For the world, this message was history repeating itself." But for Hiroo Onoda, it was yet another psychological weapon. He held the paper, studied the printed words, and whispered American lies. They will stop at nothing. To him, this was all part of the enemy's deception campaign, an elaborate hoax to lure him out. He folded the leaflet carefully, tucked it in his bag, and returned to the jungle. Every sound, a rustle of leaves, a distant shout could be a trap. His paranoia had become his armor. The jungle wasn't just hiding him anymore, it was owning him. By the mid-1950s, Hiroo and his few remaining comrades had become legends among the islanders. They would steal food from farms, raid supply depots, and vanish into the night like ghosts. Fishermen would tell stories of jungle spirits, taking their tools and rice. Children were warned, "Don't go too deep into the forest, the Japanese soldiers still live there." Onoda watched from the shadows, heart pounding, muscles tensed. The line between man and myth had blurred. He had become both hunter and hunted. But as the years passed, he noticed something terrifying. The others were beginning to lose faith.
One soldier whispered, "Maybe it really ended." Onoda's voice hardened. A soldier's duty ends only when his commander says so. It was not just an order, it was his religion now. In 1959, word reached Japan that Hiroo Onoda might still be alive. The newspapers ran stories calling him the forgotten soldier. But on Lubang, he was slowly becoming a forgotten man. One by one, his comrades died, some in gunfights with police, others from tropical disease. Onoda buried each with military honors, no flag, no rifle salute. Only silence and the jungle's endless hum. He stood over their graves, saluted, and said, "You followed orders until the end. I will not fail you." He was now the last one, a soldier without an army, a war without an end. Finally ended on March 9, 1974. When Onoda emerged from the jungle, the world stood still. Cameras flashed, crowds gasped. He bowed deeply, his uniform torn but his posture proud. He said softly, "I am sorry I could not serve to my commander's satisfaction. The war lasted too long." Japan welcomed him as a hero, but the world he returned to was unrecognizable. Neon lights, busy streets, television screens, everything had changed except him. He still carried his 1940s discipline, his 1940s values. When asked what he felt after learning the war had been over for 3 decades, he replied, "I feel embarrassed, I feel proud, I feel lost." For 30 years he had lived in a world that no longer existed, a world made of faith, duty, and ghosts. And now, standing in the heart of Tokyo, the last soldier finally realized, sometimes the hardest war to end is the one inside your own heart. While Onoda hunted enemies, in the jungle, Japan was rising again. Skyscrapers, neon lights, television, baseball. Children born after the war were now adults, and most didn't even know what Imperial Japan meant anymore. In Tokyo, life was futuristic. In Lubang, time had stopped. The 1960s brought the space race, color TV, and rock music. But for Onoda, the only sound that mattered was the clicking of his rifle bolt. He remained frozen in 1945, his body older, his mind still that of a loyal lieutenant obeying invisible commands. In 1972, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki told friends, "I'm going to look for 3 things, Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman." It sounded like a joke, but it wasn't. Suzuki truly believed that Onoda was alive, and he was determined to find him. He flew to the Philippines, trekked into Lubang's dense jungle, and began calling out in Japanese, "Onoda-san, Onoda-san, the war is over. Japan is free. For days, nothing. Only rain and wind." Then, one night, a shadow emerged from the darkness. A rifle glinted under the moon. Onoda stood before him, thin, wary, eyes blazing with suspicion. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Norio Suzuki, from Japan." For the first time in decades, Onoda heard the language of home spoken not as an enemy, but as a friend. Suzuki spent days earning Onoda's trust. He showed him magazines, photographs, even a newspaper, all proving Japan's surrender. Onoda refused to believe it. He said firmly, "If the war ended, my commander would relieve me. Until then, I fight." Suzuki understood. He promised to return not with proof, but with Onoda's commander. When Suzuki left the jungle, he told reporters, "Onoda is alive. He's still fighting his war, but to bring him back, we must bring his past to him." In March 1974, Japan sent Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, Hiroo Onoda's original commanding officer, to Lubang. He was now an elderly man, running a bookstore in Tokyo. But when he walked into the jungle and shouted, "Lieutenant Onoda, it's me, Taniguchi," a familiar voice answered from the trees. Onoda stepped out, rifle in hand, uniform tattered but pristine. Taniguchi saluted and said the words Onoda had waited 29 years to hear. "Lieutenant, you are relieved of all duties. The war is over." Onoda stood frozen. The jungle seemed to go silent. Then slowly he lowered his rifle for the first time since 1945. On March 10, 1974, Hiroo Onoda marched out of the jungle in full uniform. His rifle gleamed, his sword hung by his side. He had kept everything: ammunition, grenades, his imperial banner, all perfectly maintained for 3 decades. As he stepped onto the village road, thousands watched in awe. The soldier who refused to surrender was finally walking home. The Philippine government pardoned him, acknowledging he had believed the war was still ongoing. Japan wept when they saw him on television. To some, he was a hero; to others, a ghost from a darker time. When Onoda returned to Japan, the world felt alien. Neon lights, cars, crowds, and women wearing short skirts, something unimaginable in 1945. He said, "I felt like I'd landed on another planet." Factories roared, trains glided, people laughed freely, but for him, freedom felt hollow. He missed the jungle, its order, its silence, its purpose. He couldn't adjust, so he moved to Brazil, starting a cattle ranch to escape the noise of modern Japan. Even in peace, he sought solitude. Years later, Onoda began giving lectures about discipline and loyalty. He trained young people in survival camps, teaching them how to endure both physically and mentally. But when asked if he regretted anything, he paused. "I regret that I killed innocent people. But a soldier does not question orders. That was my duty." He lived until 2014, passing away at the age of 91, the last echo of Japan's forgotten war still whispering in his heart. Even in death, Hiroo Onoda symbolized something greater: the power of belief and how it can both sustain and imprison the human soul. "A soldier never truly returns home," he once said. "He just learns to live with the silence." And somewhere in the depths of the Philippine jungle, his footprints still remain, a silent reminder of the war that never ended for him.